Hi, everyone. Welcome to the California Coastal Resilience Network webinar series. My name is Ella McDougall. I am the facilitator for the CRN as the new 2020 Climate Ready Fellow for the State Coastal Conservancy, taking over for Dan Hosfeld. The California Coastal Resilience Network promotes knowledge exchange through monthly webinars on climate-induced impacts on human communities and coastal habitats. We will provide a link to the network if you'd like to join or watch past webinars. We also post webinars recordings, including today's, on our site, whose links can be found in registration and follow-up emails. Today, we are hosting Monique Fountain, Director of the Tidal Wetland Program at the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, to share about the large-scale restoration effort occurring at Hester Marsh in Elkhorn Slough. As you may know, this webinar is being pre-recorded due to technical difficulties with large-scale webinars and conferencing services. Today's date is Thursday, March 19th, 2020, and it is 10:40 a.m. For today's webinar, please listen to the video recording at your leisure. We also have attached a Google form where you can submit questions during the next 7 days. Please keep them precise and clear. I will take your submissions and hand them over to Monique, who will respond, and I will redistribute them to everyone. We also ask that you take the survey included in this email, created by Elkhorn Slough Coastal Trading Program. The recording will be posted on our YouTube site and the CRN website. And so with that, let's begin. And Monique, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ella. I hope everyone is doing well, and I'm excited to share our Tidal Marsh Restoration Project with everyone. Before I begin, I wanted to point out our collaborators, because a project like this can't be done without a whole group of people. The ESNR team is on the left, and our other collaborators from other institutions are on the right. And of course, our funders are also critical as well. It takes a pool of funding in order to get a project like this done, and these are all of the organizations that are supporting this particular restoration project. We also have other project partners. The design consultants on the left have really shaped the project and helped to determine what it looked like, and then the construction contractor on the right. So just to go through what I'll talk about today, I'll do a project overview and tell you a little bit about what's about the project itself, and then dig in to understanding the elevation issues, which I think was one of the most critical things that we had to work with. And then I'll be presenting some of the early results. So let's get started. First off, where is Elkhorn Slough? Elkhorn Slough is located in the middle of Monterey Bay, at the mouth of the Monterey Bay Canyon. It is a 7-mile long estuary, and due to historic land use changes that reduced freshwater and sediment inputs, this estuary functions more as a coastal embayment than a typical estuary. We don't have a lot of freshwater coming in from the back anymore. Our freshwater inputs have been rediverted, and I'll cover a little bit of that. So here is a different view looking out towards the ocean, and it's a little video, so I'm going to get that started. And this gives you a view of what we're looking at, kind of an overhead of the slough looking towards the coast. A highly modified system. Both the habitat and the hydrology have been modified. So, for example, looking over here on the right-hand side, these are remnant salt ponds. They're now been converted to snowy plover habitat. But much of the salt marsh in this estuary was diked and drained in the past, leaving behind these remnant dikes, which you can see right along the edge in here. And the harbor mouth has been hard armored since about the 1940s to keep the mouth open and in one place year-round. One of the things that you cannot see from this image is the influence of the entire Salinas Valley agricultural industry that drains most of the year back down through here in the back of Moss Landing Harbor, and on incoming tides, that water is then pulled into Elkhorn Slough. Another unique feature that you may not be able to see from this viewpoint is the lack of spartina, with tickleweed being the dominant tidal marsh vegetation in these marshes here. But despite the pressures of this working landscape, the slough remains an important natural resource for the region. It's one of the largest estuaries in California and contains the state's largest expanse of salt marshes south of San Francisco Bay. The slough provides important habitat for a broad range of resident and migratory birds, invertebrates, fish, marine mammals, and other wildlife. And it plays a crucial role in the local estuarine and nearshore food web. The National Audubon Society has recognized Elkhorn Slough as a globally important bird area. It has also been recognized as a site in the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, and recently as a Ramsar site, which is a wetland of international importance. CDFW has designated a large portion of Elkhorn Slough as an ecological reserve and a marine protected area. The federal government has included its tidal waters within the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and established the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is run by CDFW on its eastern and southern shore. The slough has really been a focal point for extensive conservation activities and land acquisition over the past 50 years or so. So let's move on here. This is looking at the loss of salt marsh over time. So here on the left is what the extent of salt marsh in the 1870s. And this figure is true, the colors are true to form. So the blue is water, the brown is mud, and the green is marsh. And so here in the 1870s, you can see the extent of marsh, and then moving forward to 2000, you can see how much of our marsh has been lost. So we've lost about 50% of our marsh in the last 150 years. And so how do you tackle something like this? And what we've done here is we've put together a program called the Tidal Wetland Program that was started in 2004 to address these issues. And the way that this is structured, because there's 15 different agencies that have jurisdiction over Elkhorn Slough, we want to get them all together and have them making decisions together. And so they are our strategic planning team. And then we want their decisions to be based on the best available science. So we have a fairly large science panel of 60 or so scientists from all different disciplines so that they can weigh in on the different issues that come up. And they help to identify also the data gaps. And when we do find data gaps, we'll put together different working groups of experts and also investigators that will help to fill those data gaps and make those decisions really robust. We also bring in information from our community stakeholders, and then all of this is coordinated by the Elkhorn Slough Tidal Wetland Program. And we put together a strategic plan that we continue to update, and we've done a few larger scale projects. This is the Parsons Slough project, where we reduced tidal scour in the estuary. We've done some water quality projects by opening up a bigger opening in this lagoon area. And then the project that we're working on right now, which is the Tidal Marsh Restoration Project. And I also specifically wanted to call out a couple of advisory groups for this one. We put together a salt marsh working group. These folks really helped us figure out the tidal channel densities, the slopes, just the different, a lot of the different aspects, design aspects of this project in more detail. And we had a hydrology working group that is looking, these guys are mostly focused on phase 2, helping us understand volume of water moving through and ensuring that we have the correct tidal flow and hydrology in the program, as well as also relying on the working groups of the Tidal Wetland Program. So for this project, where did we choose? We chose this little area down here called Hester Marsh. And I'll be talking primarily about phase 1, but phase 2 is going to encompass this area and the area around Seal Bend over here. But a lot of the video I have is from this area and the results as well. So looking at what it looked like in the 1930s here on the left, lush tidal marsh, and then moving forward to 2013, the green you see is a lot of ulva in the system, and it's really just mud flat with a tiny little bit of fringing marsh around the outside. And so that was just prior to restoration. And so what happened in this area is that this area was primarily diked and drained. And so quite a bit of the estuary has been diked and drained, was used for duck ponds or agriculture or rangeland. And this particular area here was used a combination of rangeland and duck ponds. And so the remnant dikes are around the outside here. This was the area that was diked, and all of this area in here. And And so when it was diked, it drained and it subsided. And so just to kind of cover what that is, this is the subsidence here. Here's your natural marsh plain, and the tidal levels here. And if you dike it and drain it, then you lose that peat, those wet soils compact, and you lose the peat material that's in there that blows away or compresses. And then when the dike is removed, this does not come back up to the proper elevation, and so you're just left with this little fringe of tidal marsh around the outside. And so that's what we see in a lot of our different areas. And here's another look at the remnant dikes here and along in here. You can kind of see them crossing throughout the area. So just to cover our restoration goals for this project, including both phase 1 and 2, we're restoring 122 acres of functional tidal marsh. We've done the first half of that, and we hope to start the second half in June. And then the other one is, of course, protecting and improving water quality through restoring tidal marsh and reducing tidal scour in Elkhorn Slough. So these areas that were diked and drained and subsided, they hold more water. So by holding more volume in the slough, that volume of water is sloshing in and out, and that increases tidal scour. By filling that area back up to marsh, you reduce the volume of water in the slough and reduce the tidal scour. Also increasing our understanding of blue carbon. And I won't talk too much about blue carbon today because we're still waiting for the results, but I'll touch on it briefly later. And then improving southern sea otter habitat. So this section that's closest to us on the left here, that's an area that has not ever been diked and drained, and it currently serves as a really nice nursery area for southern sea otters. There is the largest concentration of mothers and pups in their entire range in this section here. And so we hope that as we restore other marsh in this area, that they will move into it and be able to use it, especially because it's a little bit higher in the tidal frame. And so that brings us to the last point here, improving resilience to climate change. And what we're talking about here is bringing the marsh up to an elevation as high as possible so that it can withstand sea level rise. And that, I think, was one of the most critical parts of this project. And how do you figure that out? So what we're looking at here is a cross section through the marsh, from the upland down through our different habitats down to the mud flats here. And so this shows the elevation on the left-hand side, and in here in the colored areas you see the representation of plants. So Salicornia again as our low and mid-marsh species, and then the mix of our high marsh ecotone species here. So in determining what elevation to set our new marsh at, well, we know what the marsh looks at what it looks like when it's too low. Here's a photo of marsh that's drowning in this area. It has a lot of ulva in there, and you can see a lot of exposed mud flat. We also know what it looks like when it's too high. We end up with a field of weeds, and we don't want to do that. So you can see the pickleweed here and then the grass all in here. And so getting to that point right in the middle there, where you don't have too many weeds, was really what we wanted to do. The challenge with that is that you have some uncertainty with construction. You can't put everything at exactly the same elevation. So building in that uncertainty, we decided to fill the marsh to 1.95 meters and get it as high as we possibly could. But then there's another element to this, and that is when you put in all of this material, and in this case it was over 200,000 cubic yards of material within the restored area, the weight of that is going to press and compact down your soil and your underlying mud. And we didn't know exactly how much that would be. And so we really wanted to figure that out. So this is kind of what the layers look like. You have the water on top, then you have a slurry layer, which is that mucky layer you sink into. And then you have a plastic layer, which is a little bit firmer. And then you typically have a stiff layer, has a lot less water in it. And then you have these consolidated soils underneath that you don't have any idea really how deep they go unless you do a big core. And of course, those big cores are fairly expensive. So the approach that we took was to use a penetrometer for some of the surface level measurements to try and understand what was happening in these top layers, but to really understand what was happening down below, instead of putting a big drill rig in there, we opted for a test pad or a test study area where we filled a small area, about 6,000 cubic yards, in the very beginning of the project to the correct elevation, and then just let it sit and measured that. And every 4 or 5 days, we went out there and took a number of measurements throughout the pad to see how much it was moving and how it was consolidating. And then after that, we took that and put that into the model to kind of get an estimate of how much we anticipated our marsh would compact over time with that weight, so that our target ends up here at I don't know, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, at our final elevation here, our target final elevation. And then this is a little bit different view of that. So this is a digital elevation model looking down from above again. And what it shows you, the colors again are true to form. We have blue is water, brown is mud, green is marsh. And then this rust colored around the outside is the highest elevation. So this was pre-restoration, and then this is post-restoration. It gives you a sense that we really brought that marsh plain up as high as we possibly could without getting into the weeds or getting into the area where we would have too many weeds. So this is a view of phase 1, close to completion. And so phase 1 was about 65 acres restored, including the grasslands, the adjacent grasslands. We put over 200,000 cubic yards of soil placed into this degraded marsh. Some of the material came from a nearby flood control excavation project on the Prahoro River, and the rest of it came from the adjacent followed farm. Now, initially, we wouldn't normally think to take material from the adjacent hillside, because that material, that topsoil, of course, has evolved for a very long time to be able to grow and have the nutrients and things and the microbes that it has. And scraping that, you end up with a nutrient poor soil surface. But as it turns out, I think one of the things that we're learning, and we're still checking this, but it looks like that the scraped soils are actually working out really well, because we're scraping off a lot of those nutrients. The native plants do better, because the invasive plants are not growing as well. We're not getting as many weeds. So our native plants may be a little bit smaller because there aren't as much nutrients, but they're definitely dominating. And so that's been a really interesting lesson learned from this project. So we started planning this project, funding and permitting in 2011. Our construction start date was in December of 2017. It went through August of 2018. So it's been open for just over a year and a half. And this was, of course, right at the end of construction. And when we opened it up, it was really interesting. So this was right after it had opened up and been overtopped a few times. There were schools of fish coming in, and then the birds. I think this is a video, so let me play it. You can see the birds moved in right away looking for fish, and it was really spectacular. I think we hadn't expected this from the very start. And then again, this is just a few days later, looking at those tidal channels. Now, the tidal channels were, Andrea Wolfark, our stewardship coordinator, was able to go through using her historical ecology imagery and find the old tidal channel networks, the historic tidal channel networks. So the channels that are in here actually excavated original tidal channels, which was a really neat aspect of this project. And we were very happy to be able to use that historic channel imagery. I think it made quite a difference. Okay, there we go. So moving on here to monitoring and some of the results. So our this project we're monitoring a lot of different things. We have about 23 different parameters that we're monitoring. We have surface elevation tables set up through here. We have 10 transects that we're going out and looking at percent cover and elevation changes and all sorts of things, as well as using the UAV to do digital elevation models where we really can look at those percent cover changes and changes in tidal creek formation over the entire project. And it's a really neat tool. I'm really happy that we're able to use this new technology, and it's giving us a lot of information, but we're also double checking that information with our classic ecology transect on the ground measurements. We're also, I'll talk a little bit about a big Ecotone project that was done by our research coordinator, Kirsten Watson, and a graduate student of hers, Karen Tanner. And we also did some grassland restoration, which I'll talk a little bit about too. So let's look at, so in general, in the early results, what I'll talk about are some of the key physical and chemical changes, and then some of the plant community changes. So starting with our elevation changes, which was one of the things that I was very concerned about from the beginning. This image on the left is taken right after we opened it up in August of 2018. And the color changes that you are seeing here are really millimeter changes. It's quite remarkable, the accuracy that this has. So these bins are, looking at 3 millimeter changes right here. And then if we move over to May of 2019, you can see there's a little bit more blue. It's subsided a little bit more. And so what does this actually look like? Again, our fill elevation here was at 1.95, and the majority of our marsh was in this area here. And this is what we have now, and it's dropped quite a bit. And I think the take-home message is that about a third of the marsh has dropped at least 5 centimeters, and it's lower here, and that is less than expected, because we had expected the entire marsh to drop about 5 centimeters with the weight of that new soil. So that's good news for now. Looking at water quality. So we're looking at hypoxia. On this side here on the left, we have percent hypoxia and time along the bottom. This blue line here is the average hypoxia from 2014 to 2017, so average hypoxia per month. And then the orange line here is just for 2018. So this is during construction. And then there was a break. We had to remove the instrument during the time that they were actually working and pulling the containment berm down. And then for the 4 months afterwards, this is what we saw there. And so we were, I think, fairly surprised to see such a dramatic change. There's a couple of different reasons for that. It may well be because we didn't have a big algal mat in there during that time. We also had quite a change in the marsh topography, in that we filled it up and there was a lot less water in there, and then we didn't have the benthic communities developed yet. So we'll really be watching this one, our water quality, to see how it changes over time as the benthic community fills back in and some of those microbial processes start up again. Then looking at carbon sequestration, that really is going to take some time, because we want our marsh to really have grown back in before we do a lot of measurements. So we are looking at different areas. We're looking at the mud flat, we're looking at high and low salt marsh, and then grassland. And so before the restoration, we have 5 reference sites around the slough that are in similar conditions, and 5 sites within the restoration area itself. So we went in, we measured, we did took cores and used a gas analyzer, and so we took a number of measurements that will then go back and repeat after probably I think the summer of 2022 is what we're targeting, and we'll see how much biomass we have back in and what's going on in there. So then looking at marsh recruitment, this has been very exciting for all of us. Early on, we did see, this was taken in May of 2019, we saw a big recruitment event, and it arrives on the seeds. The seeds arrive on the tides, and so we didn't need to plant it. And so the entire area was not planted, and then it will gradually colonize, and the cover will increase quite a bit. So here's a timeline looking at August of 2018 here on the left. These red X's indicate plants that were there shortly after it opened up. And this one here, this long straight line and the long straight lines in here, these are because these are remnant dikes that were in there. And they were pretty high and they just got scraped down. And so the material that was in there sprouted back up really quickly. Some of these others were tidal channels that weren't filled, and so right along the edge of the creeks we had still some fairly robust plants that were alive. So we went through and characterized what all those were, where they were, just so that we could be able to identify the new plants when they came in. And then by spring of 19, of course, Spergularia was one of our earlier recruiters, and you can see it came in pretty nicely. And then fall of 2019, we had a nice pickleweed cover. This is not consistent, though. As you can see, the big bare area in the back here, and then this lush green area here. So it was really interesting, the patterns that we're seeing, and we haven't quite figured out exactly what that's from, which is, I think, part of the exciting part of this and seeing how everything is unfolding. But it could be elevation. So we're seeing that the highest elevation is the elevation that's actually recruiting in or staying there and coming in the soonest. These lower elevation areas are there. But remember, this entire marsh is way at the high end of the tidal frame, so that's really interesting. It could be proximity to a creek. It could be land use history in these particular areas. It could be from the sediment that we put in, because we put in some soil from the pajaro and some soil from the hillside, and there could be some other factor. So we're exploring that now. We've been out, we're studying it and seeing if we can figure out what is going on. This is here's some of the data on that. So this pale area here is bare ground. The green is our pickleweed. The yellow is our non-native plants, and this orange is other, mostly weeds. And so you can see our highest pickleweed recruitment is actually up here in the Ecotone. So it may be that our seed event, which is the highest concentrations we know from Melanie Mayer's thesis, is that our highest concentration of seeds are between December and February. And it could be that the tidal water after that was flushing some of those seeds out. So we'll continue to look at it and see what happened. So then this Ecotone experiment that Kirsten and Karen did was really interesting. I think it's one of the largest Ecotone experiments that has been tried. So the Ecotone plants are those rarer plants that we find in the estuary. They're in the transition zone, or the Ecotone, between the marsh and the grassland. And those are much slower to colonize naturally. So what we did is we went through and collected their seeds and grew the plants. We grew 2 species in the greenhouse at the reserve. We grew Distichus, the salt marsh grass, and Frankinia. And then we had 3 other species which we contracted out to grow, Jaumea, Spergularia, and Extraflex. And then we had California conservation folks come. They planted more than 16,000 marsh plants in just a few weeks. And you can see the difference in the areas that they walked around in, that would, I think that, and versus what they didn't walk in. So in terms of how the experiment was set up, we split it between uniform and clustered. And the reason is to look to see whether or not there were positive interactions among the plants that might help them protect them from the environmental stress, such as desiccation or herbivory. So we had 9 plants in a cluster, or 9 plants planted uniform. So these are the 9 plants here, and then 9 plants clustered, and that was done across an elevation gradient in the same number of plants. So we took those 5 different species and had these columns and kind of randomly stratified this so that each of the 6 blocks had all 5 species with 270 plants clustered and 270 plants uniformly spaced. And this was, again, random. Their order was decided randomly. And then, so here are the 6 blocks that were planted. So each one of these is a block, and we had 6 blocks throughout with each of these species. And so here was what it looked. We planted in November, December of 2018. Here is what it looks like in April. And here are the 9 plants in the uniform section, and here are the 9 plants that are clustered together. And then in August of 19, you can see that the uniform is actually doing quite a bit better in terms of the biomass. And the clustered here, it looks like there's likely some competition. And we don't know, it was a fairly good rain year, so we don't know if the conditions will change once we have more drought and more stressful conditions. We don't think the conditions were as stressful. And then looking at the grassland restoration, that was done just above the Ecotone blocks in this section here. And here are the species that were planted. Gum plant and a rush and a creeping wild rye and meadow barley, salt grass, and some California broom. And so what we were looking at here is some of the differences in how if they were planted with plugs or seeded, if they were done with a seed ball or put in with a tractor. So we looked at a couple of different methods and you know how concentrated they were. So in general, we planted in the fall and winter of 2018. We used plug plantings, and this is 3 or 1.5 foot centers. The hand seeding was done. Here's the pounds of hand seeding. So these are seeds that were collected in the watershed and then used for this restoration project. And we also did some tractor seeding of these 2. That was these 2 sections down here, which were larger tractor seeding. And let's see if I have some of the results here. Oh, no, so we had 17,000 plugs that were planted again by our CCCs and also by volunteers. And we had a number of volunteer planting days and had folks come out, and that was a lot of fun. They really, really enjoyed being involved in this project and helping with the planting. We also planted about 100 pounds of locally produced native grass seeds planted by hand and by tractor, as I mentioned. And here is what the hand seeding looked like. And so here's the gum plant in May of 2019. These were planted on 3-foot centers. They're looking pretty good. But it was the meadow barley, I think, that really took our breath away. We had not expected that the meadow barley would look this good, and we're hoping that it looks good again this May, as good as this May. So this was really, really spectacular results. And to look at the data on that, here's a slide. So this one shows, this line in the middle here shows what our target is. So it's our official target for the cover for native plants. And then the green is the green are the native target plants, and the blue is non-target plants, those plants that we didn't actually plant. And then the yellow is bare ground. And so if we go over here and look at the meadow barley, you can see that the native cover was tremendous, and the non-target plants were not as abundant, and the bare ground was fairly little. But we had mixed results, and we'll be looking at this again this year and see how, in the second year, what they do and if they're able, if this changes much. But this was, I think, pretty. We're really pleased. Of pretty exciting results for our first time. Okay. So I'm just going to put this video back on again so that you can take a look at it, overlooking the Elkhorn Slough. In one of the other things to point out, so here is phase 2. This is a section of phase 2. And one of the other things I wanted to point out in terms of how it looks, this was taken at a fairly high tide. But it still shows you how vulnerable our marshes are. And as I get around here to the phase 1 section, I'll stop this, and you can see it a little bit clearly. So this is looking from the north end of it, and this is our restoration area that we completed, and this is our phase 2 area here as well. And yeah, again, I think seeing this, I'm always, when I look at this video, it reminds me that our marshes are vulnerable to sea level rise, and we're really happy to be able to have the opportunity to restore the particular areas of this and have a chance to watch it improve and and restore this coastal ecosystem. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks, Monique. That was amazing and so full of fantastic information. So much restoration work going on. That's just so fantastic to see. I personally wish that everyone had been able to come here and see this live, but at least we're going to get the recording to them. So, to all our listeners, please don't forget to submit questions on that Google form that we're sending out in this email. And also, I want to let everyone know that the Coastal Training Program is sending out a survey, and that'll be in this email as well. So please take the survey, fill out the questions if you have any, and any feedback can be sent directly back to me, Ella. And we'll have Monique answer those questions, and we'll get them back to you in a week or two. And we'll get through this strange time with difficult technological problems, and we'll continue to persevere. So please feel free to reach out with anything else. Thank you all for your patience, and please stay healthy, happy, and productive. So thanks, Monique.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.